think we've gone live now. So I'm just going to go through the could everyone put their microphones on silent? Is that okay? Thank you. I would like to begin by welcoming those members of the public and press who are watching the live stream of this meeting via the Council's website. Minutes of the meeting will be produced in the usual way, and a recording of the meeting will be available to view on the meeting page of the Council's website. To enable the meeting to run in an orderly manner, I would ask all members of the forum who have video cameras to keep their video cameras switched on for the duration of the meeting and to keep their microphone muted except when invited to speak. Officers will join us to introduce their reports in the same way. Any members wishing to ask questions or make a comment should indicate this by clicking the raised hand function on the right-hand side of the screen. When the chair invites you to speak, please unmute your microphone, ask your question, and then mute it again to allow the officer to respond. I would ask for your patience if we run into technical problems, and should this occur, the chair will declare an adjournment while the fault is addressed, and the public broadcast will be paused. If it is not possible to address the fault, the meeting may be abandoned until such time as it can be reconvened. Okay, so members, we will begin the meeting with a roll call to establish who is present. When I call out your name, please confirm your attendance by muting your microphone and stating that you are present and the sector you are representing. So first person is Alison Anderson.
Yes, I'm here.
Christopher Bennett.
Present. Secondary Academy.
Leslie Birch.
Present. Emerging Trust Primary.
Yolanda Botham.
Yeah, hi, I'm here and it's post 16 FE.
Nikki Brown.
Hi, present, co-chair, Cambridgeshire Primary Heads.
John Culpin.
Present, CEO Anglian Learning, representing academies.
Sasha Howard.
Present, outgoing chair of CPH.
Ryan Kelsall. No Ryan. Okay. Peter Law.
Oh, morning. Sorry, I was here. Present.
Yep.
Just
okay.
was on mute.
Okay, and then Peter Law.
Yeah, morning, Ryan. Peter Law, present, representing secondary academies.
Helena Marsh.
Present, Principal of Linton Village College and co-chair of Cambridge Secondary Heads, representing the academy sector.
Richard Scott.
Present, representing secondary academies.
Karen Scott.
Present, representing maintained nursery schools.
Karen Taylor.
Present, representing academy sector.
Kat Thompson.
Present, representing maintained primaries.
Charlotte Whistle.
Present, representing maintained special.
Mark Woods.
Present, representing academy sector.
Okay, and I've got observers. I've got Helen Brooke.
Present, I'm here representing the unions.
Claire Clark. No Claire Clark. Alan Costello. No. And Jacqueline McCampill.
Present, representing John Young from the Diocese of Ely. And I'm sorry, my camera's not working, so you've just got the emblem on there.
Okay, thank you, Jacqueline. Councillor Daunton?
Yes, hello, good morning. Claire Daunton, Councillor for the Fulbourn Division and a member of Children and Young People Committee.
And sorry, just need to go back to my... do we have Councillor Thompson?
Yes, you do. Hello, I'm County Councillor Bruce Thompson. I'm Vice Chair of Children and Young People's Committee and I'm part of Longstanton Ward. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Taylor?
Morning all. Yeah, Councillor Taylor, member of CYP, and my division is Amesbury St Neots.
Okay. And we have with us today Martin Perbrick.
Hi, good morning, everybody. Martin Purbrick, Executive Director for Children Education and Families, Cambridgeshire County Council.
And would you have Sarah Callaghan? No,
Sarah's trying to join the meeting at the moment.
Okay. Martin Wade.
Yeah, Martin Wade, Strategic Finance Manager.
And we've got John T. Holden.
Yeah, morning, Senior Finance Business Partner.
Have I missed anybody?
Hi, Tamer. It's Mark Vickers. I'm just checking that I'm still on the list. I should be, I think.
Oh, I had your apologies, Mark.
Okay. Yeah, not sure what happened there, but I'm definitely here.
I'll add you back on then. To the
Morning,
list,
everyone present and representing AP Academies.
Lovely. Thank you, Mark. Okay.
Yeah. Can I also make myself known? So Michael Hudson, I'm the Executive Director for Finance and Resources here at Cambridgeshire County Council. My apologies, I do have to leave just before 11 o'clock, but I'll be here for as much as the first hour as possible.
Oh, thank you, Michael. Okay, so I'll move on to item 1. We need to appoint a chair and a vice chair for the forum. Do I have any nominations for chair for this academic year? Do we have any nominations? We need a proposer and a seconder. I did receive a nomination.
I think.
Propose.
Sorry, Tamer. I think you received a nomination for Mark Woods, and I'm happy to propose Mark Woods as chair of Schools Forum.
Is anybody happy to second that?
Happy to second.
I am, Christopher. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And can I ask if anyone is against that appointment? We'll do a show of hands. Is anyone against that, or is everybody happy for that to go ahead? Yeah, it looks like everybody's happy. Okay, that's great. Thank you very much. I don't know if we've got any. I didn't receive any nominations for vice chair, and we may, unless anyone has a burning desire to do that at the moment, we could always leave that to the next meeting when people have had a chance to think about it. Yeah. Okay, we'll do that there. Okay, so that's all of the nominations, and I'll now hand over to the new chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, everybody. So it's straight back to you, Tamar. Would the Democratic Services Officer report any apologies for absence, please?
Yes. Okay. So I've received. Oh, won't be a moment. I just need to get my screen back up. I've received apologies from John Young. Jacqueline McCampbell is subbing, and also from John Cole. Not John, because he's here. Lisa Peacock, Nadine Abbott, Marie Abbe-Cascara, and Adrian Ball.
Thank you very much indeed. Does any member wish to declare any disclosable pecuniary interest or non-statutory disclosable interest? No? Thank you then. We reach the item that the Democratic Services Officer will temporarily remove you as a... sorry, I don't need to say that because none of you have done so. So we're now going to look at the minutes of the last meeting to agree them for accuracy. We'll go through those minutes page by page. So if colleagues can be looking at them, I believe that they are page 3 of 70 on the list. Is there anything anybody would like to raise about page 3? Doing my best to check for hands. There are many of you there today, so do please feel free to speak up if I haven't asked you and you have something to say. Page 4. Again, no. Page 5. 6. 7. Excellent. Thank you very much indeed. So we agree those are the correct record. With the action log, is Sarah with us now?
Yes, I'm here. Yes, I'm here. Apologies.
Hi, Sarah. Thank you. Could you update us on any actions that remain outstanding, please?
Yeah, I think there were two actions. One was about the SEND teams working on a district basis, which I can confirm they are, but I believe we have a vacancy in one of the districts. So schools should have an allocated SEND caseworker. Please do alert me if that's not the case. And the other one I think was regarding safety valve and the communication around it, which obviously we'll pick up within the presentation, unless Tamar's going to tell me I've missed anything.
Doesn't look like that's the case. Tamar seems happy that we've managed to complete all of that. So thank you very much indeed. We'll move on to item 4, Schools Forum, update on appointments. Can I ask Tamar to introduce this report, please? Any members of Forum who wish to ask any questions or make a comment, if I could remind you to raise your hand and I'll do my best to make a note of them. Thank you.
Okay, so I'll briefly run through the new appointments for Forum we've received. You'll have had a chance to read the report, so I'll just go through the new appointments. So we've got Charlotte Whistle, head teacher Castle School, who's replacing Joan Hardwick as the Maintained Special Schools representative. And in a change to the published report, we've got Mary Abescara, executive director of SEND at Meridian Trust, and she's the new Academy Special Schools representative replacing Simon Bainbridge. We have Alison Anderson, CEO of Multi Academy Trust. She's filling one of the Academy representative vacancies. We've got Mark Wood, CEO of Meridian Trust, Academy representative, replacing Richard Spencer. And we've got Helena Marsh, principal of Linton Village College, Anglian Learning Academy representative, replacing John Colpin for the remainder of his term. And you'll currently see that there's currently no permanent replacement for Susan Cannell, but John Colpin is here to temporarily fill the vacancy until a replacement can be found. And we've got Lisa Peacock, and she's Little Flames Childcare representing Early Years Reference Group, and Yolanda Botham, CEO of the Sixth Form Colleges Trust, and she's Post-16 FE representative. Also non-voting members, we have John Young, Diocesan Director of Education, and we have Councillor Feroz Thompson, who replaces Councillor Michael Atkins as the CCC non-voting representative from the Children and Young People's Committee. And also to note, we've still got a vacancy for Maintained School Governor, but we're actually in the process of filling that position. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you to colleagues. I can see there's some chat going on the side, just referring to allocated caseworkers. Thank you, Martin, for those responses too. So I'll leave that conversation over there, as I think it's pretty self-contained. Thank you very much. Can I ask Sarah Callahan now to run through the presentation? Again, if members have questions on the presentation, can you use the raise blue hand function on the right of your screen to be able to show that? I think it's probably better if we can wait until Sarah's finished the entire presentation as opposed to, and I will keep an eye on them, but I won't come to anybody until we get through the presentation, if that's okay. Sarah, I can see you're setting up.
Yeah, I'm attempting to, Mark. Bear with. I've not used Zoom for a while. Apologies. Been on the old. Do tell me if something is appearing.
It did, and now it's not, unfortunately. At the minute, I can't see it unless other colleagues can. I think we're all finding our way around Zoom again this morning.
Yeah, sorry about
absolutely.
that. I've just not used Zoom for a while. Is anything happening now?
Not as yet for me.
Oh, wait a minute. That maybe if I press share, it might
Yeah,
work.
we're starting to get there. Yeah, unfortunately, I'm now looking at a picture of myself. If we could avoid that
well,
as
how
much as
lovely.
possible, that would be good.
Okay, let's see what I do for now. Oh. I want to get to this. Has anything happened?
No, I was on screen for a while again, and now we're back to I'm just seeing the gallery of faces.
Right. Okay, apologies, colleagues. This is not ideal.
I can try and find it and see if I can share it, Sarah. It won't be a moment.
I've updated it actually, Tamar. Do you mind if I send you the updated version? It's just, I think it's more relevant.
If you send it to me and then start talking, and then I'll
Yeah, I'll start talking. Don't worry, I don't
yeah,
have a problem.
and then I'll share it for you.
I just want to make sure I send you the right thing. I am sorry, colleagues.
It'll be fine. Everyone will be recovering from Mark's face coming full into the middle of their screen. They'll be taking a minute to get over that.
Indeed, I should ask the question if counselling will be available for people, Ryan, at this point, should I not?
Right, it's on its way to you now, Tamar. Right, I'll start talking then. So the presentation that you're about to hopefully see on screen is really giving a rationale for some of the decisions or proposals that we'll be asking for a decision on through this meeting. I know it's not news, and we've had, or when I say we, prior to me joining Cambridgeshire, there's been several discussions regarding the unsustainable pressures within the high needs block owing to the surge of requests for education, health and care plans. So what I'm aiming to share with you this morning really is a summary of some of the challenges that we're experiencing around meeting that additional pressure, and also some proposals about how we could work collaboratively to address them. Are you actually seeing the screen now?
I think yes, it's just arrived.
Oh, hallelujah. So hopefully you're looking at a slide that says getting it right for children with additional needs, stable schools built on love.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, right. I'm making no apologies for talking about stable schools built on love. This is a reference to, some of you will be familiar with the policy, Josh McAllister's policy, stable homes built on love. And the principles driving that approach are the same principles that need to drive our approach. So in social care, just as in SEN, there's been a huge surge in demand for independent placements, putting children outside of the county to have their needs met. And in Cambridgeshire, similarly, we're spending currently for around about 400 children, 22 million of the high needs block allocation on high cost independent provision. What we need to do through implementing the Inclusion for All framework, which I'm going to go through within this presentation, is meet those needs in Cambridgeshire and create that sense of belonging across our services, but also within our schools and settings. And I know obviously you already do, we're not starting from scratch, but if we want to redirect that 22 million, we could be investing it better by meeting need earlier through reconfiguring our capital estate, developing provision on mainstream sites, and also drawing from the expertise that exists within this virtual space right now, in terms of potentially redirecting some of the services that are currently funded through the high needs block for us to work in a more system-led collaborative approach to use the expertise within our special schools, for instance, to upskill and support our mainstream provision, which I know, again, we're not starting from scratch, that practice does exist, but could we think more creatively? Could we actually redesign the local authority offer so that it is a genuinely more collaborative offer? So I'm moving on to slide 2, Tamar, where I'm just referring to the ISOS report, which is an independent report. Apologies to some of you may have attended. On Monday, we had the start of our dialogue around Inclusion for All, which is the framework we want to adopt, which has been agreed within the council. And we brought together some reps from across years, primary, secondary, along with our health colleagues, to have, it was a courageous conversation, we framed it, and it was quite a challenging, frank and full conversation about the issues that are impacting on the local authority, on parents, but ultimately on children, and also you at the front face in schools. So the ISOS report is 166 pages. But it is, I know a number of you will have looked at it, but it is a really, really valuable read. And I do believe it quite well articulates the challenges that are actually pitching us and creating a bit of a competitive environment. So this summarises basically that if we have seen 46% increase in Cambridgeshire in terms of the dependence on education, health and care plans, currently we have about 8,000. That is driving an unsustainable financial pressure. But ultimately, we have to ask ourselves, through the delivery of those plans, are outcomes changing and improving for those children? The SEND reforms that were introduced in 2014 had the right ambitions around having that joined up approach across education, health and care, so that children were at the centre of that. But what's ultimately happened as a result of them is that parents have been pitched against schools and against local authorities, because obviously they want the best for their child. They perceive quite often the best for their child is independent provision. If we don't support that, it often goes to tribunal. So the costs are going up and up and up. The shift over the last few years nationally on dependence on independent provision over the last 4 years is 256% increase. And obviously for some children that's absolutely the best outcome. But for others, you know, let's be honest, they're seduced by the marketing, and we know that the impact for those children is not always what we want it to be. So parents are being pitched against the local authority, schools are being pitched against the local authority and parents. We've got 34 schools projecting deficit. That deficit, like the deficit in the high needs block, is being driven by this surge in need. We're being pitched against each other to manage the deficit in the high needs block, whilst also challenging schools around managing their own deficits. Whereas where we need to be under that banner of inclusion for all is saying, what are the resources in the system? How do we use those resources differently to improve outcomes for children and young people?
Sarah, sorry, can I just
yes.
pause you for a second? I don't know about other colleagues. We're still seeing title slide 1. I think Tamar's driving the presentation on another screen, but that's not what we're seeing on the screen below. So colleagues won't quite know. We're seeing your title slide, Tamar. So if you click on number 2 or whichever slide Sarah thinks she's on.
Yeah, we can click onto 3 now, Tamar, if that's okay. So I was
sorry,
just
it's still showing 1.
Oh.
Sorry, I think it's probably better that we work that out. Now 3's
yeah.
come up. Yeah, it's showing that screen.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Hey, Tamar, sorry, Sarah, just before you do carry on, can you just put it into slideshow mode? There's a little icon at the bottom of the screen. If you click on that, just so because it's very small to read. I know.
Oh, I'm trying.
My eyes are not brilliant.
I'm trying to do it. Sorry. Can you see it still?
You can either go to slideshow and present, or there's a little icon down the bottom near the bar that increases the size of the screen. Looks like an old-fashioned presentation screen that you used to have to pull up. Sorry, colleagues.
I'm sorry. I am trying to. It looks different to how we used to do it, so I'm trying.
All right, Sarah, carry on, and I'll send you some instructions via Teams, Tamar.
Thank you, Michael.
Oh, thank you. Oh, sorry, Tamar, to put you in that position. We're all so used to Teams here in the local authority. Apologies, colleagues. So I will carry on. To be honest, this is a lot of information that you are well aware of. I suppose some of the things that are most valuable are, you know, what's getting under the skin of what's driving this. As I've said, there is a growing position, I think, where we are being placed in a competitive rather than collaborative response to this. And basically, we've got to meet the needs of those children. So ultimately, what we've got to do is think differently about the resources that we have available to us and reconfigure them so that we can use them differently to improve outcomes. And what we do know is that we're not in this situation on our own. There's 113 out of 151 local authorities that are either working with the DfE as a safety valve authority. So that means obviously they're getting funding based on certain conditions and changes in practice that will reach a balanced budget over a term of 5 years. Or they're a best value authority where they're getting increased monitoring to change their practice to drive down this spend. Of those 113 local authorities, 38 of them are safety valve, and only one of them has met the terms of those safety valve agreements. To put it in perspective for Cambridgeshire, in the high needs block, the funding split, the big elements of that funding within which we've got to do something differently around are there's 22 million spent on independent high cost provision. We could abandon the presentation, Tamar, if you want, because I can speak and share the presentation afterwards. But the key things to think about are we've got 22 million that we're spending on high cost independent provision. That's supporting the needs of around 400 children. We've got 5.8 million that was devolved to schools to support the BAPE programme, and we know that schools are feeling the pressure and that funding is not seen to be fit for purpose. Critically, that funding did not support children with SEN. So we're still spending 7.8 million on education other than at school that includes a high percentage of children that have some level of SEN. We also know that children with SEN are disproportionately represented in elective home education figures. So we've got over 130 children that are electively home educated that have some level of special educational needs. So all of those things understood, what are we going to do about it? What can we do differently? So the Inclusion for All framework is our proposal in terms of doing things differently. So within it, we're striving towards having a more collaborative approach. And if we're going to work in collaboration, collaboration is built on trust, and trust is developed through having transparency. I know there's been some challenges in terms of the level of engagement within the safety valve agreement previously. What I was going to propose was that we agree to a high needs block subgroup, and within that high needs block subgroup, we look at that budget within the split that I've described in the high needs block. We look at the impact. So if we're spending 22 million on independent provision, what is the outcome of that? And what I can tell you is, when you look at it from an education perspective, the outcome is not where it should be. So where we're investing, we're not seeing improved outcomes for children, and where we're driving a system that is dependent on, the golden ticket, even education health care plan. When you look at it in terms of the so what for children, I don't think we can confidently that by getting an education health and care plan, the outcomes for those children. So if that's the case, we need to bring it back to basics. I don't like that terminology because it reminds me of John Major, but we need to be thinking about what is the funding in the system, what are we actually trying to do? We want children to thrive. That is the ambition of the council. Are education health and care plans actually facilitating that? Is the funding allocated against genuine need? Are we looking at schools funding that is currently attached to plans and thinking about using it differently, because notional funding is by definition notional, whereas what we want to be more confident about is where we are funding, is that actually matched with need. So then, at the moment, our practice is nowhere near where it needs to be. Our timeliness, we should be from point of referral for plan to issuing a plan. It should be 20 weeks. We know we're woefully off beam there, and that is driven by a number of capacity issues that we need to plug. But obviously, that's dependent on funding. What we're looking at in terms of that inclusive practice workshop is we've looked at that 20-week end-to-end process, and we can see where the pressure points are within it. And we're looking at how we redirect the funding to address those pressure points. Then secondly, there's inclusive partnerships, which is critical to this conversation. How do we engage and have joined up meetings that are actually looking to demonstrate the impact of those partnership arrangements, and that has a financial narrative attached to what we're doing and what the investment is leading to. And then I'm just going to switch my camera off because I think my volume also, just to add to the technical issues that we're experiencing, might be impacting on your ability to hear what I'm talking about. So finally, I suppose where I was going to get to is, the big ask is, how do we ensure that we're working collaboratively, we're working transparently to address these issues? What's the opportunity to do that better? Can I have a commitment to a high needs block subgroup? Can I have a commitment to engage with us around embedding the Inclusion for All framework? We're planning to have an inclusion summit in January where we will be asking what is our shared definition of inclusion, and how are we collaboratively going to realise that shared definition through the implementation of those 6 areas of focus. So there will be workshops on each of those 6 areas, and we need your engagement around them, and we need the financial input. We need the input from our enabling services around data as well, so that when we're saying this is the activity we're going to undertake to enable us to drive spend down, we're actually basing our projections on accurate data, because I think previously we've been compromised in terms of the data that we have used to shape those projections and then to inform the changes that we are making. So to end, I think we're obviously in a situation where we've got to change our practice, and there's a sense of urgency and pace that we need to do that. We can't do it in isolation. I recognise there's frustration within the system, and there is a risk that we are pitched against each other in terms of how we address that. We are going to be asking for your support to increase the transfer, and that's going to be addressed in the further agenda items around the shift from the schools block to the high needs block. But the rationale is that we are trying to meet demand with a number of variables that are outside of our control. The only way that we can get into a space where we can control them better is working in collaboration. So we can spend time talking about the frustrations that we are all encountering, or we can accept that the context is the context and we can get around the table to do things differently. There is a strong commitment corporately at the most senior level to do things differently, and we will be sharing that transparently with you, and we will do that through that high needs block subgroup. So I will pause, take questions, points of clarification. Apologies again for the technical issues. I will share the presentation after this, but I'm very happy now to open up the floor for questions, comments. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm looking for hands, people who wish to make a comment, contribute, seek clarification. Minute, I can see stunned silence and no more. Nothing from anybody. I find that. Here we go. Sorry, Helena, I can see. Sorry, I can't see the order they're coming. I've now seen it. Thank you, Helena. Helena Marsh.
Hi, Mark. It's Helena, just for accuracy. Just wanted to check. I don't know, maybe this level of detail is too specific for the strategy stage you're at the moment, Sarah. In terms of working collaboratively and sort of investing in more sustainable solutions, is there a particular idea about how this will be achieved and how the money that's being requested through the transfer will be invested in that to avoid the volume of independent specialist provisions that are taking up an inordinate amount of the budget?
Yeah, there's an firstly, can you hear me clearly now?
Yeah, I can.
Oh, good. Yes, there's a number of things that we have pulled together in terms of a number of actions that we've had to commit to, obviously, to meet the revised terms of the safety valve agreement. But in delivering them, Helena, we've got to obviously work with you, which is why I'm saying we need that subgroup. So obviously what we've got to do, those 407 children that are currently in high cost independent provision, our ambition is that their needs are met in county. So we have the ERB programme. We've introduced and implemented a number of those ERBs. We want to roll out that programme further, but we've obviously got to evaluate the impact of that. So we want to share that with schools. So the shift will be mapping the shift from the high cost independent provision into alternative provision, into ERBs, into special, into mainstream. But obviously you can't do that overnight. So we do need schools to work with us about, well, what's going to help us deliver that sooner and in a way that still continues to meet the needs of those children.
Thank you. So just to state, I'd be keen to be involved in that dialogue. We're co-situated at my school in particular with a special school. We've got a facility on site that I've had various conversations with the LA over the years about how we can make that into a specialist base. So happy to be involved in that.
That's great. Thank you.
Smashing. Thank you very much indeed. If I can now turn to John Colpin.
Thank you, Mark. And thank you very much, Sarah. It was a bit difficult to follow that, considering obviously we had the problems with the PowerPoint and actually also your commentary. So it's a slightly disruptive presentation, which sort of commenting on. Just say, obviously, the idea of creating the sort of high needs subgroup, etc., and working closely with Forum, I think is welcome, and actually working with the various sector groups. I suppose my observation, it kind of goes to the second item as well, is second item or next item on the agenda is we have been here before. 2 years ago, 3 years ago, when we started to enter into these conversations, and the agreement to move money from the schools block to the high needs block was very much about reforming sort of SEND and that wider transformation program. And I fully accept, as I imagine all of those on this call do, that actually we're dealing with various crises in the system. And, inevitably, effectively, you're trying to keep the plane in the sky while actually also trying to redesign it. I suppose, however, the concern is that having over the last 2 to 3 years moved money from schools to high needs, and we haven't really sort of seen a substantial improvement in service, the risk is that actually we're being asked to vote for something again, or at least to support something again, with no guarantee actually that things will be better going forward. And it's a bit of a leap of faith that you're asking everybody on this call to take again at a time when actually school budgets will now become even more under pressure due to the budget implications that were announced 2 weeks ago. So it's not, I suppose, much of a question. It's more of an observation that actually this is, potentially quite risky for schools going forward, with no guarantee that actually we're going to see much improvement at the end of it.
So, John, can I come back on that? Because I totally agree. We've all been here before. And I guess the issue is you're not making a leap of faith in the local authority. You're making a leap of faith for those children, and that's what we're all, that is what we're all here for, and there are variables that we cannot control. The context is, the some of the things that are driving those pressures are outside of our control. But what we can do is use our influence to make things better. And I think that the context is the context, but the children, we are not meeting their needs as we should be. Collaboratively, we're not meeting their needs as we should be at the moment. And we are the system that needs to respond to those issues and challenges. So I accept that. I think it's a really fair challenge, but I think it's not a case of the local authority has not delivered. I think the context in which we are operating within has disabled us, but we need to take accountability. We've got new leadership. We've got a new commitment and we will make it happen, but we won't make it happen without your collaboration.
Okay, John. Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed, Sarah. Ryan, I believe you're next.
So I think I'm fully aware of the context element. I think the bit that's frustrating is I'm aware of the desire for ERBs. The slight frustration is that we haven't resolved that. I know that there's people who are running existing ERBs have been asking to expand, have been asking for an SLA, an agreement to expand, have been asking for a review of ERB funding so that it's aligned across all the ERBs, and have been told it will happen next year or maybe the year after. I'm also aware people have offered to draft the SLAs and support the context of that. I understand that there are challenges, but that the LA have not moved forward or done anything about the existing ERB programs. They're really simple things that could be done. I'm looking here, I know Peter's on the call. Peter and I have discussed at length for years the ERB situation, and yet nothing is coming forward. These are existing ERBs. It could be done with a click of your finger. We could sit down, we could thrash out an SLA, and we could move forward. But
well,
it just
let's
doesn't
do that,
happen.
Ryan. Let's do that.
Sarah, that's great. Drop me an email, drop Peter an email. We've been asking over and over and over again. My last contract with you was 2012.
Right. Okay.
And I've been asking repeatedly. So I get the challenges. There are some things that take a long time. There are some things that don't.
Yeah.
And just this inertia just is so frustrating, because that would help do some work straight away. And it would build confidence because when you're putting out to schools to say who's interested in setting up an ERB, those of us who are already doing it will say, no, thanks. Those who are looking at doing it will come and speak to those of us who are doing it at the moment and say, well, I wouldn't do it unless this, and this is in place. So you're not going to move forward. So I think what would be really helpful is to get those who are existing ERB leaders around the table to talk about what's required, align the funding, get the service level agreements and contracts set up with your existing ones, and then we're in a position to move forward. That would be a really practical thing to do. And I know you're new into post. That would be a really good place to start, where you could have tangible impact straight off the bat.
Okay, well, I will rise to that challenge, Ryan. Thank you. And sorry you've been so frustrated waiting. I can tell you that we did, there was a meeting this week looking at the evaluation internally of the ERBs, and there is a real strong commitment to push that model forward. I think there's been an element of frustration about the models adopted are not consistent. And so we want to obviously learn from the good practice, but I take that on board and I'll move forward on that. Thank you.
Thank you both. We'll move on to Leslie. I'm aware this item's due to finish at 10:50. I know it's going to bleed into the next item quite considerably. So if we can stay with just Richard as the end of these questions, we'll move on after Richard to the next item. And I'm sure you'll be able to capture anything else you want to say after that when we discuss the next piece. So Leslie next.
Thank you. I'll be quick. Subgroup, very supportive. I think there needs to be a timeline, and we need to know what the outcomes are. I think there needs to be some dedicated front loading of time so that this doesn't drag on and on. So schools are really clear. Can we look at efficiency and effectiveness so that we work with, for instance, clusters of schools, trusts, so that we're not repeating ourselves and therefore the same messages are there, but that strategy needs to be agreed and needs to be out there. It's not going to be, perfect, but we need to start, because our young children deserve the best. And we've got children, in primary schools going into secondary that just need that help and support. And we also need to look at our staff training offer as well. so that our staff are supported in this, because we're going to be losing good staff if we don't do this. So short and sweet.
Just on that, Leslie, the inclusive people area will look at that workforce strategy. You know, so if we're going to do this, what are the skills that we require to support it and drive it? So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Leslie. Councillor Taylor.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks. I am aware that we have got, I think, in 2 of our schools, certainly in well, one in Amesbury, the enhanced resource base ERBs, and I think we do have one set up in Wintringham as well. So that came off the back of I think off the safety valve. So they are coming through, but it seems to be, it's by the sounds of it, speaking to School Forum, listening to you, it seems to be sporadical. It's, you know, and I think that is a really good idea, that you look at this holistically now, because it just seems to be in certain areas by the sounds of it. And also, Sarah, I would like to understand more about, if I have heard this right, but you said that alternative provision isn't working. So do you mean as in the outcomes for the children in that are not working? I'm just trying to understand what you mean by, if I've understood that, why they're not working.
Okay, so it was one indicator, and there's loads of different ways of looking at this, but what we know is when you look at the educational outcomes for children with education, health and care plans, either in AP or within our, you know, just with educational health and care plans, their educational outcomes have stagnated. So it's significant, it's not improving. Obviously, for some of those children, you know, they're never going to get the same outcomes as other children. But the whole objective of the Education, Health and Care Plan was enabling those children to access education. So you would expect that then their outcomes would improve. But we're seeing that it's just, you know, baselined. So I suppose it just prompts the question is, are the education, health and care plans doing what they were supposed to be? And your other key point on the ERBs is we're at the moment, because of the critical nature of the demand, we're stuck in that urgent, critical, meeting the needs on an urgent basis. Whereas, as you just described, to change that, we need to get into that strategic mapping out, meeting need earlier. And that's the objective of that Inclusion for All piece of work, moving out of that urgent knee-jerk response to having a much more strategic, planned, I think, as Leslie described quite well in the last question.
Thank you very much, both. I think if that's okay, we'll move on to Richard.
Hi, yeah, I just wanted to concur with John earlier about the need for a concrete plan before we start talking about putting money from the high needs block into the high needs block. And I think I'd emphasise that with schools serving particularly disadvantage, you add that to the BAPE, and therefore, speaking on behalf of schools that are in receipt of BAPE money, there's an added financial risk there, and it puts at risk some of the inclusion work we're already doing in schools. So it feels a very difficult decision with so many unknowns to start putting money from the schools block into the high needs block, given that, and particularly in Fenland and the schools that I work with.
Yeah, you make some good points, Richard, and I guess that's why I'm saying we need this high needs subgroup, don't we? The disapplication deadline was November the 18th, so obviously we had to meet the deadline, but that doesn't mean it necessarily goes ahead. So that work that you require to make an informed decision, if we can do that work within that high needs block where we have greater transparency of where we're investing and why, and bring all the resources into that discussion, then there should be better confidence in the proposal that we're making.
Okay, thank you. Mark, I did say I would stick with Richard. I'm just going to check. Is it a brief point, or do you think it's probably better to hold it till after the full presentation of the finance which follows? Because I know these two items keep speaking to each other. Is it okay to keep you first for the next section? And then we'll just...
Fine, Mark. Yeah, no problem at all. That's
Brilliant.
fine.
Yeah. Thank you kindly. So the action for the previous piece was just that we were asked to note the presentation. And that's in green on my script, which makes it very straightforward and easy to do. I think the next section is going to be the one which is going to be longer and more complex. Do keep your hand up, Mark, because that way it will keep you on the top of the list. So if we can move on now to item 6, and I can ask Sarah and Martin to come in and introduce the piece. They'll take us through the presentation, setting out different proposals and decisions required by Forum. There'll be a chance to ask questions after each section of the presentation. Could you be as disciplined with raising your hands as you've just been, because it's made my life very, very easy to follow it through. Thank you, colleagues. Look forward to the presentation.
Thank you. Right, so hopefully I have some better luck with the technology. Can you now see the slides?
Most certainly can, Martin. Thank you.
Brilliant. Pleased to hear it. Right. So, okay. So hopefully, as I say, you can see the slides on the screen. If I can get them to actually move, that would be good as well. Right. So, yes. So this is just the kind of the introduction to the 25-26 school funding arrangements. Going to run through what we know so far, and probably more to an extent what we don't know so far as well, following the policy announcements by the DFE following the budget a couple of weeks ago. In terms of that, and as you said, Mark, I'll pause after each section so people can comment and ask questions as we go through. So obviously we had the autumn budget statement, and the key headlines for schools funding were 2.3 billion extra in 25-26, and that covers all of the schools funding blocks across the DSG and pupil premium. One of the big key changes for next year's budgets are a number of the grants for teachers' pay and teachers' pensions, employees' contribution grants, and also the Cool Score Budgets grant is going to be baseline into the national funding formula for 25-26. So obviously schools would have received that grant separately in the current financial year, and obviously the Cool Schools budget grant only came in from September. So again, as whenever these things are kind of baselined in, it's going to be interesting to see what impact that does at individual school level, because obviously the grants were allocated on a specific basis, and obviously when they're rolled into the main funding formula, that allocation of funding is likely to differ in terms of individual school impact. The ESFA have also said that they expect there is going to be an additional grant in respect of the increase in employers' national insurance contributions, and further details will be published on that in due course. So effectively, old grants that you currently receive for teachers' pay and core will be rolled into the main funding formula, and then there should be an additional grant. As yet, there's been no mention of any further grants linked to future pay awards, so that's obviously something that would need to be keep an eye on as we go through the process. So as we said, schools national funding formula itself, an additional 1.3 billion has gone into the funding for next year to cover the teachers' pay award for the remainder of this academic year. So effectively, the full 12 months of salary costs will be funded at a national level. Again, haven't got the details, so don't know what that's going to look like for Cambridgeshire and Cambridgeshire schools. So we'll have to work through that when it comes out. So the ESFA have said they do aim to publish the national funding formula allocations for all the funding blocks by the end of November. So obviously normally we would have that information already and would have been able to do the detailed modelling, but as that has not been published, we've not been able to do that the level of detail that we would normally be able to do. So in terms of the schools block itself, as in 24-25, local authorities must use all of the national funding formula factors and can only use those national funding formula factors. So for us, that has no impact, as we've been aligned with the national funding formula for a good number of years now. Local authorities are required to move the local funding formula factors at least 10% closer to the national funding formula values. Again, that shouldn't be an issue for for us in terms of the approach that we've taken in previous years. Probably the next 2 points are probably the two kind of biggest changes which are going to impact in terms of the actual cash allocation schools are going to receive. So the minimum funding guarantee for next year has actually been set at between a minus figure of 0.5% and a maximum of 0%. So effectively we're talking flat cash in terms of the increase at a per pupil level. And again, you'll already know this, but obviously as well, minimum funding guarantee does not protect schools with falling rolls. So obviously we've seen quite a fluctuation in pupil numbers at individual schools. So obviously those schools themselves will see a reduction in funding. Factor values have been increased at a national level to take into account that rolling in of the grants. And as I said, that the kind of the floor is cash flat at 0% after taking that into consideration. So again, not a particularly a great settlement in terms of the overall increases that schools are likely to receive at an individual level. In terms of the high needs block, nationally, that is increasing by about 1 billion. They've said that's 9% nationally, but what they've said is local authorities can expect to see between 7 and 9% uplift in funding compared to previous years. That's considerably higher than we received last year. I think last year, 24-25, or current year rather, we received about 3.6%. So obviously, bearing in mind that our demand is increasing on average at around 10% per year. Last year's funding for high needs increased by about 3.6. Even if we get on the floor funding at 7%, obviously you can see that there's a disparity between the uplift in funding we're receiving and the increase in demand and costs that we're actually experiencing, as Sarah alluded to in the previous presentation. On the main, the structure of how the high needs funding is going to be allocated is not changing. And the rationale behind that is because they've said that the government wants to take more time to consider what changes are needed to the national funding formula for high needs to try and address some of the system-wide issues that we kind of touched on in the last item before that is taken forward. Just like with the main schools funding, the high needs block MFG is going to be set at 0% for special schools and including special free schools, but excluding non-maintained special schools and independent schools. So again, that in itself is potentially a kind of a real terms cut to those individual schools. In terms of that, we're still waiting for further details on how the kind of the grants are going to be rolled into the special school funding, and then the mechanism for how that is allocated at individual level will have to be discussed and agreed, taken forward. Central School Services block continues to reduce year on year. Historic commitments will reduce by a further 20%. That doesn't have too much of an impact on us other than in terms of cash terms. Last year was the final year that we had a contribution to combined budgets. We've now removed that entirely from the funding, and those costs which were previously met by DSG are now met by core council funding. There have been some changes at a national level to copyright licenses, and additional money has been put into the system to cover that, but that has no direct impact on schools and the amount of funding schools will receive. Okay, so as already touched on, normally at this stage, I'd have liked to have given you the kind of the illustrative per pupil funding levels, but unfortunately, as I said, the data hasn't yet been published to allow us to do that. Obviously, assuming we get this information by the end of November, the intention is to complete that modelling and share it with schools early in December, so that we can have those discussions at the December meeting of Schools Forum. In terms of the principles I intend to do the modelling on, and I'd appreciate comments on this as we go through the presentation. Obviously, we base that initial illustrative modelling on the 24-25 data sets, because that's what we will be provided with until the final data is sent to us by the ESFA in late December. Based on the modelling, we will I will do a range of modelling based on the impact of the block transfers at the different percentage points, so we can see what that means in terms of overall affordability and impact at individual school level. Minimum funding guarantee, we will initially set that at the maximum allowable of the 0%, but obviously, again, may need to look at the different options around that because of overall affordability. And then again, final figures will obviously be updated to reflect changes for growth funding, new schools, variation to pupil numbers, and business rates, which is now a centralised process for all of our maintained schools as well. The SFA have published some provisional formula factor values. They have said they aren't final yet because they are still completing data validation, and I'll share those with you on the next slide. The revised provisional minimum per pupil levels have increased to £4,955 for primary and £6,465 for secondary, and that includes the uplift for the rolling in of the historic grants in terms of those numbers. So apologies, this is quite small in terms of the data on this slide, but in the blue column on the left hand side is effectively what we funded in the current financial year based on the overall affordability and the area cost adjustment for Cambridgeshire schools. In the next columns you can see the national approach in terms of what they're proposing that they fund for 25-26, and you can see how much has been added on to the formula factors for the baselining of the grants and the core schools budget grant uplift. As you can see, most of the amounts don't then get any or much more additional uplift on in terms of the overall funding once those grants have been put in. A lot of the figures have been rounded, so you might get a small 0.5% uplift in terms of the funding, but overall very, very little uplift on those individual formula factors. Obviously, when we run the figures through our local formula, the amount that we will actually allocate will be based on a scaled version of those funding factors, dependent on overall affordability. And obviously, as we move through the presentation, obviously some of the decisions that we're asking you to make will obviously impact on that overall affordability in terms of those final numbers there. Just a couple of other things before we pause for comments. So as well as the disapplication for block transfer, we've also had to put in a disapplication for the continuation of the exceptional premises factor. This is a factor that's been in place since 2015-16 and just affects 5 primary schools where they've either got historical arrangements for playing field or alternative hall rental or educational space outside of the main school. We're still waiting for comments back from the DfE around the approval of that, but we do need to seek schools forum approval to continue with that historic arrangement. The criteria have changed somewhat, so these are now the only schools which do qualify for this in terms of how the DfE set out the thresholds for that. Just in terms of the decision-making process, just a reminder in terms of some of where the decision-making sits for some of this, and in the actual covering report, there is a kind of a more of a detailed table about the role of schools forum and the decision-making around that. So, as in previous years, we must consult schools forum on any proposed changes to the formula and any transfer proposed from the schools block. We aren't proposing any significant changes to the local funding formula, other than just to meet the DfE criteria of aligning with the national funding formula and kind of moving that closer to that. As I said earlier, we'll already do that in terms of our national funding formula, so there is no significant change there. Obviously, we've already touched on the block transfer, and these are just a couple of slides which kind of show that increase in growth that we're seeing in terms of overall number of EHCPs and the costs of high needs as they continue to increase in terms of those numbers, and this quite frightening graph shows the kind of the current forecast for potential increase in the cumulative deficit over the next few years. And what we've also seen, based on what we've been told to assume in terms of funding increases from the ESFA, is actually that in-year gap is starting to widen. As I mentioned earlier, that the annual year-on-year growth we're seeing on high needs is outstripping the increase in funding that we're receiving as part of the high needs block. Hence, we are seeing that gap widening on an annual basis in terms of that. As Sarah's already alluded to, because of the deadline, we've already submitted the disapplication to the DfE around the 1.25% transfer, but in no way is this predetermined and is obviously subject to further discussion in terms of how that funding is going to be applied. And following on from some of the conversations we've already had, I think looking at how any additional funding that we do transfer across the block transfer is targeted towards that creating that capacity in special schools and ERBs specifically, which seems to be the kind of the main area which we feel would benefit there. I will pause there and take any questions or comments. I've probably if I stop sharing my screen for a minute, and then we can see people easier. Bear with me.
Yeah, thank you, Martin. Mark, I think this is probably the ideal moment, hopefully, for your point.
Yeah, thanks very much, Mark. And it does come back to Sarah's presentation, but obviously there's some themes in Martin's to pick up. So first of all, Sarah, thanks for the presentation to get a sense of, your emerging priorities. Definitely. I do agree with others that a bit of work on the high needs block does need to be done, but I completely agree with John and Richard's point that if that piece of work is done without the wider strategy work, most of the benefits of that work will just be lost over time quite quickly. And I think there's a sense in probably amongst many leaders across Cambridgeshire that piece of work is an absolute priority. Whichever way this plays out, definitely we want Olive Academies to be involved for two reasons, really. One, because obviously we're the main commissioned provider of AP through the two academies in Cambridgeshire. But secondly, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, that Olive Academies is part of the REACH consortium. That's the testing consortium looking at the change programme in terms of the test and learn programme. So we're currently working with 32 LAs across the country, looking at their AP strategy and how it relates to their SEND strategy and their wider LA strategy. So it would make sense for us to be part of that if possible.
Thank you, Mark. Martin, do you have any comment, or Sarah in response?
I was just going to say, Mark, I was involved in the change programme in Islington. So we piloted the local authority inclusion profile, which I think is critical to this piece of work. So it'd be great to have your engagement in that group.
Yeah, no, it makes sense, Sarah. No, I'm aware of that programme, and yeah, we're positive about it too. So perhaps follow up outside of the meeting.
Thank you very much, both. John?
Thank you, Mark. Two questions, really. The first one, I noticed earlier on that we had the Executive Director for Finance on the call, and I believe he's had to drop off. So my first question, are there particular concerns to the financial viability of the County Council as a whole? And I assume that might be one of the reasons why that individual's on the call. And secondly, relates to any knowledge you have, Martin, about employer national insurance cost. While that may well be covered by the DfE, I'm thinking about contractors, and most of us will have contractors, grounds maintenance, catering, cleaning, etc., who will also have to pass on their costs for increased employer national insurance, which is unlikely to be covered by the DfE, and that will probably go up as more people at the lower end of the pay scale move up, and they then enter that threshold in terms of national insurance. So whether you have any observations on that, because that was obviously a further increased cost to schools.
Yeah, no, thank you, John. Yeah, no, so in terms of the kind of the county council, obviously, if you kind of looked at the graph that I showed in terms of that graph of doom almost, as it kind of the trajectory of the deficit increased. So obviously at the moment, no, it isn't an immediate threat to the county council and our overall reserves. But obviously as that deficit is forecast to increase over a period of time, that the cash situation does become a does become an issue for us, as it does for a number of local authorities going forward. So obviously, yeah, that is, Michael's, is a considerable concern in terms of that going forward as well. In terms of the national insurance, yeah, I mean, I think that it's similar issues with national insurance and national living wage in terms of that impact on providers that you probably deal with and what that impact in. There has been no inclination that there is going to be any additional funding to support that at the moment, and actually without the detail around the national insurance funding or grant that comes in from the DFE, it's difficult to know exactly what that is going to cover. I probably shouldn't say this, but being a bit cynical, as we know with some of these grants, they never quite cover the full costs that are incurred when they actually come through. And for each individual school, the impact will differ depending on your staff profile and the providers that you use as well. So at this stage, no, I don't have any more kind of insight or detail on that. And I'd like yourselves to just waiting the next set of announcements, which will hopefully give us a little bit more clarity about the kind of the amounts we're talking in terms of those additional grants.
Well, could I just pop in on top? Is Martin Perbrick just coming on top of that?
Of course, Martin.
I don't know how to put my hand up. Sorry. Just to reflect. So just to go back to the point about Michael's presence. Yeah, and echo exactly what Martin Wade has said. But also the statutory override, is scheduled to end in 2026, I think. And I think the fact that Michael's here represents how important that particular decision will be, how that progresses for us as a county council. If the override was put directly onto our balance sheet straight away, we'd be in significant difficulty. So all of these decisions are really critical for the council, but as Martin said, we're not in that position right now. But looking forwards, with that graph as it is, and with the decisions that the government has to make about such important matters as that override, it could have a significant impact for Cambridgeshire and for many, many other local authorities. I think we're one of, over 100 that are in a similar position with their high needs block.
Thank you very much, colleagues. Is there anyone else who would like to ask a question or make a comment? If not, if I could be so bold as to myself. In a minute, I'm going to be asking people to vote. And I always think it's really interesting to understand what the implications of a vote are. So I'll look particularly at the high needs block transfer. We're being asked to vote for two different sums. I don't quite understand how that works in terms of what would happen. Is it we vote for the most popular? What would happen if the majority of people don't wish to vote for that? What are the implications of that, and what happens next? And I'm always interested in the fact that you are only given certain things to vote on. So we've only been given two options to vote on, colleagues. I don't know how others feel around that, but I don't think any of us were involved in defining which ones we got to vote on. So if I can just I know there's a few comments in there and maybe some questions too. I don't know who'd like to pick that up.
I can start with that, and the two options is my fault, Mark. I'll put my hand up on that one in terms of the approach to that. So it was trying to figure out how to frame this, and I suppose it was a case of we obviously put the disapplication into the DFE. We obviously need to provide them with evidence or views from schools forum. So I think what I was trying to do here was effectively kind of get views on whether the preference from schools forum was 1%, 1.25%, but obviously you could potentially vote not to approve any of this. In a way, what we're asking for is is a steer from schools forum on this particular one and get views on it in terms of the process. As we said before, ultimately this is a Secretary of State decision in terms of the actual decision, after which it will be then a local decision, as we said, as to how we then actually apply this in terms of the funding formula. And as we've touched on already, affordability is obviously going to be a question mark as well in terms of that. So I'm not quite sure how best to do the vote. Tamar and I did discuss this previously in terms of that, and we weren't quite clear ourselves, if I'm brutally honest, as to the best approach in getting the appropriate views of members of forum.
Thank you for that. Is that Nikki? Sorry.
Hi. Yeah. Thank you. I just wanted to raise a point given that we are kind of back here again, that the last time we were having this discussion, we raised the concern that the messages that approving moving money from into the high needs block, the messages that sends out about the flex that we have in our budget, which doesn't necessarily reflect the reality. And I know that I think it was yourself, John, that at this time last year wrote to as part of the F40 committee and also to MPs. And I just think that it needs to be noted that we are faced with an impossible choice here. And if we choose to approve, it's because we really have no real other options. I think that some of the things that we hoped would have happened if that money was transferred haven't transpired. And I think it will be a difficult conversation for heads with governing bodies where, you know, a year on, even more schools are now in deficit. Some of those deficits are over 6 figures. And we were very clear at the last forum that to acknowledge that this was not a local authority specific issue. It was to do with the appalling state of funding nationally for SEN. But I think it's also, you know, difficult for those schools who are now facing deficits to explain. When we made that difficult decision last year, we asked for some assurances that that money wouldn't just disappear into the black hole of debt of SEN and that we would see tangible changes and that money was to be used to invest in better processes. And I'm not sure how confident I would feel explaining to colleague head teachers and governing bodies about what that actually achieved. Sorry.
No, thank you very much. Real clarity there and that sense of history, that these aren't decisions that are taken in isolation. I was speaking with Sarah yesterday and explaining it's been some time since I've been on Cambridgeshire Forum. I have been here before and I remember these conversations and they've carried on year. So thank you very much indeed for that. I don't know if either there are any colleagues from the local authority. Sarah, I see your physical hand raised.
Yeah, and my yellow one. I've actually managed to put my yellow one up. No, I totally accept what the points Nikki's making are really valid points. I think the scenario is that what's the alternative? Because I think what I'm hearing is that there hasn't been any communication about the impact of doing the transfer, and perhaps that's the bit we need to get better at. And it was mentioned about the ERBs and how, you know, the programme needs to be escalated. And I wonder if that's one of the commitments that we can make and recurrently review should this transfer be approved. So I think there is an onus on us as a local authority to illustrate the impact of what we're doing, and we need to be much better and much more transparent about that. I'm hearing that loud and clear. But the context it's so challenging, and I guess I would just like us to move into that space where we can collaborate and resolve it together. But it's not easy.
Thank you, Sarah. Christopher, I see your hand is there.
Hello all, thank you very much. Yes, just really saw one point, as you noted, Mark, about we've been given 2 options, 1 or 1.25, but as ever, surely there's other options, as in continue as we are, or actually reduce it down to 0. Talking to other secondary academy heads, you know, and who I represent, you know, we do feel a bit aggrieved that with the money that we've transferred, as John already mentioned earlier on, we haven't seen any improvement from the money that's been transferred already. So therefore, should we transfer any money at all? And that was the point which I've been asked to raise here in this forum. because we haven't seen any of the impact so far that we were previously promised. So therefore, in terms of credibility with the local authority, that's really quite low. Thank you.
Thank you, Christopher. Yolanda, I can see you're waving. I presume that's because this is about Christopher as opposed to the fact you have to drop off.
No, I've got a quick question. Apologies, I cannot find on Zoom the hand, so forgive me for using my real one. I wanted to ask a question as a newbie that hypothetically, if this discussion were to decide that Schools Forum was not going to support the transfer, am I right in understanding that that becomes a Secretary of State decision? Because after all, the local authority has submitted the request already, appreciating what's been written in the papers. So does that become a Secretary of State decision? That's the first thing. The second thing, as a new person, I'm sitting here reading these incredibly detailed and rich papers. Thank you very much for that. But as you've already pointed out, Martin, we're not clear about what the impact is on individual schools, what this really means. And we've heard from a lot of, I mean, if I can, I think what I understand is that colleagues feel that they've been here before. The local authority is working incredibly hard. The demand is increasing exponentially, and at the moment the money coming in just isn't sufficient. However, we're being asked to sit here today to transfer more money into the pot with a promise of a much better plan that will resolve it, and I'm sure that's possible. What would be wrong with actually pushing this decision to the Secretary of State? What's the implications of that? That's what I'd like to understand.
That's fine. So just in terms of that, so regardless of, because what we're asking for, proposing at the moment is a transfer of greater than 0.5%, that is a Secretary of State decision regardless. And Schools Forum have the power to agree 0.5% and below. Anything above 0.5% goes to Secretary of State. So what we have to do is provide evidence of the views of Schools Forum. So even if Schools Forum didn't support this, it would still be a Secretary of State decision. And as I said, then it would be down for the local authority to decide whether we implemented that, if the Secretary of State supported it or not. So yeah, it's slightly nuanced in terms of the different rates and the amount there. I think in terms of the funding that we've transferred in previous years, and I completely get all of the comments from colleagues around the kind of the benefits and the improvements in the system. Effectively, what we've seen is all of that money that has been transferred has been there and has been used to support the increases in demand. So increases in ERB places that we've already seen, increases in special school places, and the considerable increase in the number of EHCPs in mainstream schools as well. So although you've not seen a kind of potentially a particular change in the system, what it has done is it's funded a significant increase in individual young people who are receiving that support within schools. But as noted by colleagues and as in the presentation, that funding is still not enough, hence the need for the system change as well there. I don't know if education colleagues want to come in on anything more on that at all.
Okay. I would just add, Martin, that the biggest spend is that 22 million on independent, isn't it? And because those children have that provision named in their plan, it isn't within our gift to overnight say, right, we're ceasing that. You're going to now be in an ERB or you're going to be in a special school. But that has to be the direction of travel. So we've got to twin track, haven't we? We've got to twin track developing provision in county, whilst also, obviously, there's costs of tribunals, legal challenge, everything else. So we need to look at the profile of those children in that independent provision. And for those that are post-16 that drop off, then we start to cease to place. And that's what the kind of impact measures that we should be illustrating in that high needs block subgroup. We could say, right, there's 407 children in that independent provision, the costs associated with them are these. We're developing this many places in county, and you'll start to see the shift go from here to here. And then you can see the impact of the decision that you have supported or not. But I guess some of these things are not overnight things, are they? And there's all sorts of variables within it that can actually increase cost if it's not managed appropriately. But I think there is an opportunity to better illustrate the impact of the decisions that we're making. And I think that's where perhaps we haven't been quite as transparent as we could be, but we've got an opportunity to do that differently.
Thank you, colleagues. Thank you for your patience, John. We'll come to you next.
Thank you, Mark, and you know, again, thank you, Sarah, for your ambition, really, and where you want to go with this in what is obviously an incredibly challenging circumstance. And my thanks also to Martin as well for, you know, as always, a really helpful overview. Over the last few years, well, as chair of Schools Forum, I've encouraged, you know, and supported, you know, moving this money across and back in the local authority, and not, you know, completely echo what Sarah says in terms of, you know, we have to invest to try and get those savings further down the line. But, you know, come back to the points I made earlier on, and other colleagues on this call have sort of said the affordability situation, and obviously, you know, obviously the local authority has to work this through with its overall quantum money that it gets and then distribute it out to schools, is pretty dire. We saw in the summer the state of maintained budgets, and Nikki referenced that earlier on, academy budgets really not being dissimilar. It's a pretty grim picture. And again, echoing what Nikki was sort of saying, it's quite difficult to go back to schools and say, please, can we do this again? When actually there's been between a 7 to 9% uplift in high needs funding from the DfE, from the Treasury, and the day-to-day lived experience of our schools. I put into the chat earlier on about the fact that actually quite a number of schools do not actually have a caseworker, and they can't get hold of the caseworker. And I was told yesterday that the management team of the statutory assessment team at the moment does not actually really exist. It's completely depleted. So actually, leadership is falling over, and there are a whole range of reasons for this. And this is really difficult for the local authority. But come back to what Nikki was saying, you know, we have to go back to schools and say, please make more sacrifices in order to hopefully get a better situation in the future. The reality at the moment is that schools are at breaking point. Head teachers are at breaking point because of the complexity coming through. And my personal view is that actually it's very difficult for us to actually vote for any transfer without a plan, without a determined plan. And I'm not sure we're in a position where we can do that this time round. Certainly completely echo what Sarah's saying. Let's, you know, pull this together. Let's work out exactly what we want to achieve with some very clear metrics. But I would be very reluctant to again vote for a transfer without that plan being presented to us first of all.
Thank you very much, John. Unless anyone wants to come back, I'll move on to Councillor Taylor. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Yeah, as an observer on here, and I've been on Schools Forum for quite a few years, and it's really, really interesting to see the school's views on this financial difficulty. Certainly over, I do believe it was last year, it might have even been the year before, when the transfer, as we went into the safety valve area, I absolutely remember Schools Forum saying, if this is to happen, I think it was last year or the year before, that they wanted clear feedback from the LA. So I'm quite disappointed that School Forums, well, what I am seeing, they haven't had it. And I totally agree that, and I know I shouldn't be saying it from you know, a local authority's view, but I'm the one in the middle. I'm the one that can see it from both points of view. It's like you're saying, we're going to give the money over, and this is what's happened the previous years, but we'd like to be kept informed. It feels like it hasn't happened. But this year, maybe we're going to do it different. Maybe, as you've just said, Mark, we need that plan. We need to understand what's going to happen before we say yes to this transfer. And also on the back of the safety valve, we had that all laid out, and I know Schools Forum looked at that, but unfortunately, we've been sort of, what's the word? We've been stopped at that at the moment. And, you know, we had that plan for that, and that's been stopped. And I do believe we're looking at another plan to try and get that back on track. So, yeah, what I'm seeing at the moment is we're almost feeling, you know, the school forum, and we're there to try and get the two together and work together, but it feels like it's not happening. I feel like, you know, we're not being as transparent as we need to be. So that's my view.
Thank you. Karen, I can see your hand is raised.
Thank you very much. I would echo a number of things that have already been said in terms of thanks for the work that's gone into this, and also recognising the impossibility and complexity of it. But just to perhaps strengthen a line of discussion that perhaps needs to also come into this is the state of the schools. If we bring the whole matter back to individual children and high levels of need, and we are distributing a finite pot of money, it's clear what the high needs is, and I understand the whole piece around investing in order to save in the long term. But have we properly modelled what that same sum of money does in schools or is needed to do in schools? What's the impact of taking that funding effectively away from schools, and the level of need and complexity of need that we're trying to manage, not always very successfully in mainstream schools, without the opportunity to bring in the resource that might actually meet the needs of more children than we're currently able to. So I do get the piece about the local authorities side of this, but it's one pot of money. Have we modelled what the impact of taking that money away from the front line and of children with high levels of need and complex needs that are actually in our schools? What's the impact of that? And doesn't that piece of work need to be done in order for us to make a balanced decision about what is the best use of a finite pot of money? I just feel that we haven't quite got that side of it at the moment. I would like to suggest that we do look at that as well and consider that properly with some sort of detail around it. Thank you.
Many thanks. Sarah, you can come back on that or any of the aforementioned.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, I think the points that are made are all, you know, valid points. I think I just wanted to comment on Councillor Taylor's observation about we had a plan and then we didn't meet the terms of the plan. Of those 113 local authorities, only one local authority nationally has met the terms of the safety valve agreement, and one local authority has actually refused to sign the terms of that agreement. So that just puts in context the level of challenge. But it doesn't change where we are, and I think the other points are all very well made about seeing the detail in terms of what we will deliver. But I think the point of the detail is that that detail does need to be worked up together because of the issues that have just been raised by Karen. I think that, you know, if we, behind closed doors, pull together a developed action plan that then impacts on schools, it's not going to work because we are dependent on your engagement within this. And I think we were scuppered also about the date that we had to submit the disapplication, and so we are kind of working retrospectively. But I do believe that the issues that have been raised around the detail of the actions and what the changes we make and the financial impact of them could be agreed and could be monitored. And it's frustrating that we can't change the past, can we? But I guess that's my commitment anyway, that we would look to develop that action plan with you and routinely review that action plan with you.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm just going to quickly note the comments from Charlotte in the chat regarding how things have changed and how we're trying to minimise the number of out-of-county positions. And I'll just very quickly ask Yolanda's question, John, before coming to you about, is it possible to delay a vote? Or are we on a timeline, Martin, where we just have to have a vote at this point?
Well, we've obviously submitted the disapplication already. I don't know what the DFE timelines are in terms of the decisions for Secretary of State. Obviously, we need to provide them with evidence at some point in as soon as possible around the User Schools Forum in terms of that. So my honest answer is I don't know in terms of, because I don't know what timelines the DFE are working to in terms of that. So we could potentially delay it until the December meeting and until we've got that detailed modelling. But obviously then, as I say, and provide feedback to the DFE in the meantime in terms of that. But I don't know what impact that would actually have on the decision making process.
Okay, thank you, Martin. If I may be so bold, I doubt the DFE know what timeline that they're working to at the moment from most of the things that I see from it. So thank you for that. And what I think I've understood from that is we could have a re-vote in December anyway, which could then reflect something that came through from plans. So that makes sense to still do it today, and then we can address whatever else is in the future when we get there. Okay. Sorry, John, I keep saying thank you for your patience, but thank you for your patience. John.
Thank you. Very rude, Mark. Just a note, and yeah, I think the point you make, Sarah, about not sort of, thinking about the history. And we obviously understand, the difficulties the local authorities leadership faced last year in terms of turbulence with service directors as well, which made it very difficult in taking forward some of those things. So I think that's a very valid point. My point is probably to other forum representatives that when we vote, as we will do in a few moments' time, it's important to consider what signal we might be sending to the Secretary of State. Ultimately, if the local authority wishes to actually apply for the kind of disapplication and go with a high figure of transfer from school to high needs block, it's important that Forum actually gives a view, and the Secretary of State either takes on board that Forum is in agreement with that decision or that Forum opposes it. Ultimately, it's a matter for the Secretary of State if that is what is determined. But I think that's quite important for us to consider actually what we're saying as schools and other sectors about how we feel this is actually landing in Cambridgeshire.
Thank you very much. If that's okay with colleagues, I shall take the subtle nudge to move towards a vote that John just gave us, and also take that moment to reflect in our souls on what we're actually communicating as we choose to make a vote in a moment. So if that's okay, I know we have other business to complete as well. So I'll move to recommendation B, which is on here, and I think it's on the slide, Martin. I don't know if you can just replay that one for a second. Makes it very easy for everybody to be able to see. Schools Forum are asked to vote on the continuation of the historic exceptional premises factor arrangements, and I believe that Tamar is going to be giving us a roll call in which people will then respond. How would you like them to respond? They will agree or disagree or wish to abstain. Sorry, just checking. So
yes,
as your
that's
name
correct.
is called,
yes.
Could you say one of those three words? Agree, disagree, or abstain?
That's
Tamar.
correct. I'll call out the names now. So that's Alison Anderson.
Abstain.
Okay, Christopher Bennett.
Abstain.
Leslie Birch.
Abstain.
Okay, Yolanda Botham.
I actually agree.
Nikki Brown.
Sorry, abstain.
John Corpin.
Just to clarify, Tamar, sorry, we are talking about points A and B first of all, yes?
B, John, specifically the continuation of the
A's
historic exceptional premises.
Agree.
Oh, apologies. I thought we were voting on the high needs block.
No, sorry, just on B. Yeah.
So who was that? Sorry. So
should we commence the vote again? Sorry, it's just for the clarity, and it's doing it all in order. And what I'm going to ask you for, just to make that nice and straightforward, is we'll have three separate votes that follow on from each other. Vote number 1 is around B, specifically the historic exceptional premises factor. Then we'll have a vote on C1, as you can see it on screen, the 1% transfer. And then we're going to have another vote on C2, the 1.25% transfer.
Yeah.
Sorry, colleagues, if that wasn't clear. It's quite a lot, I suppose, in one go. So we'll go back to the beginning again. Sorry, Tamar. If we can start again through the list, voting on B, Schools Forum are asked to vote on the continuation of the historic exceptional premises factor arrangements.
So if you could say for, against or abstain, and I'll go through the list, and I'm recording this. So it's Alison Anderson.
For.
Christopher Bennett.
For.
Leslie Birch.
For.
Yolanda Botham.
For.
Nikki Brown.
For.
John Culpen.
For.
Sasha Howard.
For.
Ryan Kelsall.
For.
Peter Law.
For.
Elena Marsh.
For.
Richard Scott.
For.
Karen Scott.
For.
Karine Taylor.
For.
Pat Thompson.
For.
Mark Vickers.
For.
Charlotte Whistle.
Weissel, just for
Weissel, sorry.
that's all right, Timmer, and for.
And Mark Woods.
For.
So
Thank you very much, colleagues. We'll now move on to the high needs block transfer vote. So again, just to read it out, Schools Forum are asked to vote on the approval of a block transfer between the schools block and the high needs block of 1%.
Okay, so Alison Anderson.
Abstain.
Christopher Bennett.
Against.
Leslie Birch.
Abstain.
Yolanda Botham.
For.
Nikki Brown.
Against.
John Culpen.
Against.
Sasha Howard.
Against.
Ryan Kelsall.
Against.
Peter Law.
Against.
Elena Marsh.
Against.
Richard Scott.
Against.
Karen Scott.
Against.
Karen Taylor.
Against.
Pat Thompson.
Against.
Mark Vickers.
Against.
Charlotte Weissel.
Weissel, thanks. For.
Weissel, sorry. For.
That's okay.
Sorry. Sorry. Mark Woods.
Against.
Okay, so that's not been carried. So you've got, I'll read out, you've got 13 against, 2 abstentions and 2 for.
Okay.
So not carried.
Thank you, Tamar. And I believe we have the same process, but again, just to read it out for total clarity, Schools Forum are asked to vote on the approval of a block transfer between the schools block and high needs block of 1.25%.
Okay, so Alison Anderson.
Abstain.
Christopher Bennett.
Against.
Leslie Birch.
Abstain.
Sorry. Abstain.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. Yolanda Botham.
Against.
Nikki Brown.
Against.
John Culpen.
Against.
Sasha Howard.
Against.
Ryan Kelsall.
Against.
Peter Law.
Against.
Elena Marsh.
Against.
Richard Scott.
Against.
Karen Scott. Kat Thompson.
Against.
Mark Vickers. Mark Vickers? No?
Apologies. Against.
Charlotte Weissel.
For.
And Mark Woods.
Against.
Again, that's not carried. So neither of them have been carried, neither of the proposals.
Thank you. Thank you, colleagues. I'm sure many of you, like myself, felt one word wasn't really enough, and we'd much prefer to have put all the caveats that we'd like to put into that. I'm sure that the local authority will be able to communicate that back, and we will all do so through the channels that we find and CST and others. I think we will find ourselves in a pretty horrible position and have done for some time. But thank you very much for the way in which you conducted the discussion. Martin, I think if that's okay, we'll come back to you and you can carry on with your slide set.
No, that's brilliant. Thank you. So just to say on that, I will feed the results of those back to the DFE as part of that.
Yeah, Martin, I can set. I've recorded the actual vote for each person. I'll send that to you.
Okay. That's great. Thank you, Tamar. Okay, so just moving on, the last few slides are for information, really, in terms of again where some of the kind of technicalities of the process. So continuing with kind of the high needs theme, obviously in previous years we've had a high needs contingency, which we've kind of linked to the notional SEN, as we kind of referenced earlier. The notional SEN is not a separate formula factor, but is part of the overall funding received by each school. Currently, based on the approach that we've taken, it is based on these formula factors, unless the DFE provide us any additional guidance on how the notional SEN is going to work going forward. Our proposal is to keep those percentages the same. They have talked about for several years moving more of a national approach, but I mean, as yet I'm not seeing anything that suggests they might do that from next year. In terms of this, again, we have the contingency process in place where the number of EHCPs in schools is greater than 4%, and where the number of EHCPs times that £6,000 contribution that schools are required to make exceeds their notional SEN. So again, we will finalise that when the final high needs guidance comes out, but our intention is to keep that process working the same way as it has done in previous last 2 years for that. Central School Services block already mentioned this earlier in terms of reduction in historic commitments funding, and there has also been an increase in the national copyright license funding that will be received by the DFE. It's highlighted red in both 24-25 for the national copyright, because the costs did go up in year for national copyright, and the DFE are going to be funding local authorities an additional amount to support that increase in costs. And then we'll await the 25-26 estimates in terms of those funding. We're not proposing any other changes to the current allocations which support the admission services, and also the kind of support and servicing of the schools forum meetings as well, which are the 467 and the 3,000 there. But all of these figures will be subject to confirmation once we get the final settlement from the DFE. Likewise, the retained duties funding, we continue to retain, or the proposal is to continue to retain £10 per pupil from maintained schools for those services which specifically provided to maintained schools. This has been the same amount for since its introduction in 2017-18. This funding is used, it isn't badged against specific items, but effectively supports a whole range of additional functions within children's education and families, which are kind of required to be delivered. In the guidance the DFE send us, there's a whole list of those functions which I can provide if Schools Forum would like to see that list. And this is a kind of a contribution, as we used to do with the contribution to combined budgets, a contribution to kind of the bottom line to support support those services. The actual cost of providing those functions and services is considerably more than the amount retained or requested from schools. But as I say, it is a contribution towards that. The other thing is around dedelegations. Again, we're not proposing any significant changes to the delegation amounts. The only exception to that is around trade union facilities time, where I think there needs to be additional work around both the process and the funding rates to support that. But again, we'll bring that back to the December meeting to ask for kind of further information, and then eventually to ask Maintain representatives to vote on those dedelegations once we've got that detail. So just on those items, just any comments on those particular things, and would ask Schools Forum to vote for D and E around the continuation of those items that we do know around admissions and servicing of Schools Forum, and then just asking to note that the proposed changes and the final figures will be presented in January, and likewise with the dedelegations. And again, we will ask for approval at a future meeting, but just any comments on those as it stands at the moment.
Can you just drop it back one slide, Martin?
Of course, sorry,
I'll take questions now. It's just much easier when they're there in front of everybody. Thank you. Does anybody have any comments, questions, or anything specifically? I think we'll go in the order of the votes that we're being asked to make. So anything around the information that's on the slide in front of us, predominantly focusing on 467,000 for admission service, 3,000 for servicing. I'm not seeing any hands or questions, Martin.
No, I can't see any.
Second, are people happy to do one vote? Because we're going to be read out our names again and asked to answer. Is there anybody who wants to just declare that they're going to vote differently between the 467 and the 3? Not seeing anything from anybody at that point. So if we can just clarify again, we're asking the Schools Forum to approve both the continuation of the 467,000 for the admission service and 3,000 to support the servicing of Schools Forum. And then it's over to Tamar for the list.
Okay, so Alison Anderson.
Agree. 4, sorry.
4. Christopher Bennett.
4.
Leslie Birch.
4.
Yolanda Botham.
4.
Nikki Brown.
4.
John Culpin.
4.
Sasha Howard.
4.
Ryan Kelsall.
4.
Peter Law.
4.
Elena Marsh.
4.
Richard Scott.
4.
Karen Scott.
4.
Erin Taylor.
4.
Kat Thompson.
4.
Mark Vickers. Mark Vickers.
4.
Charlotte Weissel.
4.
And Mark Woods.
4. Thank you very much,
Unanimous.
colleagues.
Thank you.
I presume it's straightforward that we've noted the proposed budgets, etc., as Martin's outlined them. So if you could click on, thank you very much, Martin. Excellent work. Just particularly for new colleagues, as this refers to maintained functions and dedelegations, it states, oh, Nikki, sorry, you have your hand up. You want to ask a question about this?
Sorry, please go ahead and finish.
I was going to ask for people if they want to vote. If you've got questions about this, please fire away.
Yeah, it was more of a request really than a question. We have talked previously about this as a significant amount of money that primary schools are being asked to approve, and we would like and are requesting a breakdown with a bit more detail on exactly what this is paying for within each of those categories. We have got a CPH meeting next week, 28th of November, and we've put this on the agenda for discussion. But it would be helpful to have something more than simply the headline areas, but a bit more of a breakdown of how that money is currently being spent.
So Nikki, just the contingency free school meal, these ones on this slide now you're talking about.
Yeah, I believe that was the case.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, I can provide some more information on what's been spent against those amounts there. And just to say, Mark, on this one, we'll bring it back. We don't need to vote on these at the moment because we'll finalise it and bring it back to the December or January meeting for a vote. But yeah, Nikki, I can provide some information on that.
Yeah, that worked beautifully by the sounds of it with the CPH meeting as well. So all good. Thank you very much, colleagues. If you want to carry on, I believe there's more slides, Martin.
Yeah, afraid so. Just a few more to finish off with. So again, it's a bit of a recurring theme. As yet, we've not received any the national guidance to any changes in the national funding around growth funding. So as it stands at the moment, we're not proposing any significant change to the local approach for growth funding in terms of that. The only change with that is if the amounts that at the national level are updated. These are the amounts that they changed it to last year based on the kind of the 1,550 per pupil times your 30 pupils times your area cost adjustment. So obviously, if we get any revised allocations or figures from the DFE that we have to apply, we will obviously update that and provide that at a future meeting. Currently working with place planning to estimate the requirements for 25-26 in terms of overall schools where we think growth funding will be required. So for the modelling purposes, I mentioned earlier, I'm going to keep the 2 million that we've got in the current financial year. Just for context, we have allocated all of that 2 million in the current financial year based on the growth within both the primary and the secondary sector that we've seen. Significant growth in the secondary sector as that bulge of primary starts to move through in terms of that. So just to note that. Linked to that growth, obviously we still apply variation to pupil numbers for those new and growing schools whilst they fill to capacity. Again, we're going to start having, if we've not already had, discussions with those schools listed here around the numbers that we're going to apply for 25-26. And again, as we have done in previous years, we'll bring those final numbers back for future meetings, because obviously that does impact on the overall affordability of the formula more generally. So just to kind of note and comment those and take any comments on the growth and the variations. I'll just jump to the last slide very quickly before any comments on that. So this is just the key dates that we're working to. As I say, hopefully the DFE are going to publish their revised national funding formula allocations later this month, which will give me some time to produce some figures prior to the 11th of December meeting. I will probably say in advance they probably won't be available for the normal publication date, so they might have to come out late, because you can see there's not much time between the end of November and when we've got that schools forum date on the 11th. Then just normally 2 days before the end of term, we get the final DSG allocations, which will then inform the final allocations, which will come back to yourselves at forum at the start of January, before going to Children and Young People's Committee to approve on the 14th of January. Obviously, between now and then, there's quite a lot of steps we're going to need to go through, not least getting that data from the DFE, and obviously the wider discussions around the block transfer following the vote today and Secretary of State decision going forward. So that's the end of my slides. If anybody's got any comments specifically around the growth and new schools funding, or any other comments more generally, happy to take those now.
Thank you very much again, Martin. Colleagues, does anybody wish to ask any questions on these growth and new schools? No, I'll therefore take it that we've noted both. That's excellent. Thank you very much indeed. I think we're over then to the forward plan, Tamar.
Yeah, unless there's anything that officers want to add to that. Don't know. No.
Doesn't look like it.
No.
Yeah, just the forward plan.
Yeah, I just don't think there's anything. Yeah, there's nothing to add, or I don't. Yeah, it's just presented as is.
Any colleagues wish to make any comments? I imagine that there will be other things placed in here around high needs working groups, etc., and returning as we get more information, as Martin's just outlined. Is there anything else anybody specifically wanted to raise? No further questions from anybody? Excellent. Thank you very much. Just checking my agenda. I believe that brings us to the date of the next meeting, which is the 11th of December 2024. And then I'll just thank you ever so much. I noted Bridget Phillipson asked us to show patience as we were talking about SEND, and I've said this in many different forums. I don't know how we are able to say that to young children who are demonstrating very, very difficult circumstances, or parents that are in difficult circumstances. I'm not sure asking them to be patient would be very helpful. And I'd just like to reflect on whether that's going to appear on the new DFE or Ofsted, whichever way it is, report card. I have asked a few Ofsted inspectors recently if I ask them to show patience, are they going to? You'll be amused by some of the answers I've been given, I'm sure, but they haven't said that they're going to. I think we're all in a really complicated time where we know the level of pressure on us is completely unreasonable and unfair. I think this morning, Cambridgeshire has kind of asked really impertinent questions and worked very collaboratively and collectively together. So thank you very much indeed, everybody. I think it's dead on midday, which was when Tamar asked me to bring the meeting to a conclusion. So I will do. I hope you all have fantastic weekends ahead. Take care.
Thank you.